Hello, everyone. Welcome to the monthly seminar of the Hague Program on International Cybersecurity. My name is Fabio Cristiano. I'm an assistant professor at Utrecht University and associate fellow of the Hague Program. In today's seminar, we are launching the newly published volume, Hybridity, Conflict and the Global Politics of Cybersecurity, edited by myself and Professor Bibi van den Berg at Leiden University. We actually have just received a copy, which is very good to actually hold in our hands after a very long publication process. The volume is in open access and it's fully available on the publisher website, but also on the our program website and social media. I'm very happy to be joined by three of our contributors to the volume that I'm gonna quickly introduce. Giovanni De Gregorio, she's chair in Law and Technology at the Cattolica Global School of Law and Cattolica Lisbon School of Law. Welcome, Giovanni. Amy Ertan, a Cyber and Hybrid Policy Officer at NATO headquarters, where she supports the development of cyber policies and initiatives across the Alliance. Welcome, Amy. And last but not least, Arindrajit Basu, who's an external PhD candidate at the Leiden University in the Faculty of Global Governance and Affairs, and a technology law and policy consultant presently based in India. Welcome, Arindrajit. Before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like briefly to introduce the volume in a very few words, and then we'll be taking the contribution from our participants, and then we have a Q&A at the end of the session. So in a nutshell, this edited volume is very much about navigating the process of cyber norms formation by looking at how the global politics of cybersecurity emerge through socio-technical hybridity and conflict. And we have organized the contribution of our volume into three different sections, such as emerging normative practices, emerging threats and technologies, and emerging actors. And by doing so, we want really to kind of reflect on the ways in which cyber norms formation is occurring both within and outside the conventional sites of international cybersecurity. So the first part of the volume is very much focusing on national and international practices of norm making and includes chapters on infrastructure-driven normative changes in internet governance. Giovanni is going to talk about that more. International law and state practice in response to cyber operation, and the role of courts as novel spaces of norms formation and contestation. The second part, the one on emerging threats and technology, is actually including chapters on disinformation campaigns in the context of emergency communication. This is very much in the period of COVID disinformation campaigns, COVID-related disinformation campaigns, social aspects of information operations, and the AI military strategy nexus in cyberspace. And Amy will be talking about this. And the third and concluding part looks at the normative role of emerging actors and includes chapters on the European Union as a normative power in cyberspace, so the question of digital sovereignty, the role and perspectives of raising economic powers from the global south on both national and international cybersecurity, and Arindrajit is going to talk about India as a case of this development, and civil society and multi-stakeholderism at the UN cyber norm process. So very briefly, this was a bit the focus of the volume, and it's very difficult to kind of summarize such an extensive volume in 5 minutes. But now it's time for the presentations from our chapter contributors, and I would like to give the floor to Giovanni.
Yep, thank you so much. Hope you can hear me well.
Yes,
of course, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, really. I mean, I'm one of the contributors of the first part of the book, that, of course, many congratulations also for the book together. The different perspectives creating, also the conflicts and also the cooperation when we talk about, the old metaphor of the cyberspace. It's quite interesting because it tends to address the normative question. It's about that we are increasingly seeing the spread of normativity online. There are increasingly, there are not only new actors, as the third part of the book says, but, there are new norms that they clash to each other, they overlap to each other, and there is a big chaos in terms of understanding actually how sometimes, even if you think about the rule of law talk with the other forms of rules, like the rule of tech giants or the rule of tech, generally speaking, when we speak about AI as well. So generally speaking, what we are seeing is an incredible sense of not only uncertainty, but also fragmentation. And particularly, this was the starting point of the chapter that we wrote with Roxana Radu, that is actually an associate professor at the University of Oxford. And we work actually on that, saying, let's look a little bit at the picture of where actually narratives and discussion around normativity are going when we speak about internet governance as well. And at the end, what we see, I mean, there are at least three main paths when we speak about sovereignty, governance of the internet and digital sovereignty. And of course, the most clear one, it's around fragmentation, of course. That increasingly we are speaking about digital islands. Increasingly, there are states that want actually the bid to emancipate from the big and global infrastructure. We know actually that, and there have been a lot of attempts of states that actually want to follow their policy when it comes to the internet, not only about the EU or the US following like different type of regulations, but also, countries that downs and this kind of issues. So, and this is like a big challenge, a big fragmentation, even in the approaches, the norms that how states, if you want, just in the traditional sense, are seeing their relationship with the cyberspace, with the digital, in the digital age, generally speaking. But actually, we thought that the fragmentation we're seeing is not actually the only important phenomenon that we are experiencing. Also, because there is also another problem, another tendency in terms of polarization. What we are seeing is also that increasingly we have like narratives of digital sovereignty, even in the field of internet governance, that increasingly polarize against the good and the bad, the liberal and the illiberal. So actually, who wants to keep it on, and who wants actually to control, to keep it off. And at the end, this polarization is not really help, sometimes especially the international setting in the discussion, to find an agreement about how the internet should look like, because always we are used to talk about the internet as an open environment. We like it very much, yeah, sure. But it's not for many other places of the world. That's actually something we need to think about. And the case of internet shutdowns really shows this polarization about how states want to get control. Sometimes their even information ecosphere, if you want to talk about that. But it's not only that, it's also about data, it's also about the actors and so forth, and infrastructures, so very often. And the last point, not to make a long story, super long, it's about that we think that there is, and this is also the a little bit the last part of the book, but also in the first part. In the second, this is actually quite relevant. There is also a certain sense of hybridity. So it's not just about the state, as many actors of international law, generally speaking, in the diplomacy and so forth. We're seeing the increasing emergence of new actors, primarily and not not limited to tech giants for sure. That increasingly play an important role in saying something, not only when it comes to problems regarding speech or data protection or whatever, but also in supporting like infrastructure in terms of creating data centers, supporting investing on submarine cables. So this is actually shaping something that we usually consider as state realm, we consider as public, from a constitutional law perspective, even if you think about, not only from an international perspective. But the problem is that at the end, a lot of these things are also driven, by the private. And the problem is that it's not only just public or private increasingly, but we are increasing, or state actors or non-state actors, if you want, but we're increasingly seeing a convergence and the cooperation between different, these layers. They're increasingly seeing each other as potential ways to collaborate and find an agreement to reach certain type of policy or certain type of business practice. So generally speaking, this form of hybridity is shaping the way in which we even conceive international law, generally speaking. If you think about state, non-state actors, even constitutional law, public, private actors, this collaboration, this entanglement is really shaping the way in which we think hybridity, in the science. So in the digital age. So when we speak about the idea of entanglement, digital sovereignty, at least there are these three layers that definitely beyond the idea of fragmentation of states that want actually to create their own internet. And this actually, this of course, it's a framework that creates norms, and these norms come from these three at least layers of complexity that we wanted to analyze in our chapter. But that's it from my side, and thank you so much again.
Thank you, Giovanni, and thank you for making it in the 5 minutes. I understand this is a very short time, but we'll have the opportunity to discuss more in the Q&A session. Amy, you're next.
Absolutely. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you very much. And I also received my book. So absolutely, thank you to the whole team who made this possible. And it's been fascinating going through the other articles too. So I'm here to talk about the emerging threats part, and I'll talk specifically about the AI, which was my research area and paper, but we'll talk in the end about this broader landscape, and it's always changing, and the disinformation aspects of that too. Starting with the caveat that I'm now at NATO, but this research was done before. So this whole session is my own views and me as a person as well. So my paper within this section focused on approaches to military AI innovation. And it was conducted largely through 2020, which is before the UK had a written AI strategy, before they'd really set out their views on what responsible AI innovation meant. They've now put out a number of principles. The landscape is moving along pretty fast, following principles put out by the US, principles put out by NATO as well on how to responsibly use AI in defense contexts. But what I did at the time was notice that we had this landscape, this defense arena, where we were talking about emerging technologies. I went to a number of events without much nuance, without an examination of how these technologies are being developed, the requirements are being put in place, how they're being procured in terms of speed, in terms of addressing technical vulnerabilities, and mindful of the broader geopolitical context. In essence, the strategic elements around, is there an AI arms race? What is the role of the private sector here? How eager are they to even work with governments when we look about big tech? So some of the themes that Giovanni's already mentioned too. So I interviewed kind of senior level practitioners in the defense primes in the UK, so some of the largest defense companies, and asked them for their view on the market dynamics around AI risk, what risk mitigation they saw around the area of AI, and in general, their concerns and how they felt in terms of the opportunities versus challenges of these technologies. And they were all kind of AI security focused people. Now, some of my main findings could be grouped into the fact that we observed, and I think this is still the case, quite a serious gap in terms of supply and demand of the technology. First of all, the defense primes were generally of the view that the way that government tenders worked, it's often very price competitive, for example, and takes a long time. So didn't necessarily give the incentive to really go over the top into the security research. And when we talk about AI, there's a huge amount captured in that category around testing, evaluation, verification, validation of algorithms, the data security and infrastructure, again, around data or networks too. So that is potential very obvious linkage to cyber defense and a lot of the basic cyber hygiene when we talk about security threats of these technologies. Talking about the risk gap, through the chapter, we uncover this view that actually there aren't enough experts, or there weren't the time knowing about the risks, and awareness or informed understanding of what government procurement or MOD agents needed to be asking for in order to get the best products. Asking them how they thought to close some of these risk gaps, the technical ones around explainability, around the data, around the verification. There weren't many productive answers. Asking about views or teasing out views on some of the strategic questions, AI arms race. I got a really good quote which just said, everything around norms, it's not a technical issue, it's a social policy issue, and therefore not something that the defense practitioners were even thinking about. It wasn't within their remit. They didn't see it coming out of the UK at the time, which goes into the concluding parts of the chapters that says, okay, some of these challenges around international approaches to AI, the fact that different states have very different approaches, and it is how you use it, leads us to conversations around what's the role for NATO, what's the role for the UN or other organizations that might be able to develop norms and principles to ensure that we get it right now, rather than falling for this Pandora's box trap when it's too late. So this was done largely 2020-21. A lot's happened since then. The UK has been one of the most transparent in putting out its approach to defense AI. Of course, it's happening in an incredibly challenging landscape where not only are we trying to deal with AI being brought into defense environments and all over the world, it's being used offensively. And that's touched on in the broader context of the other articles, looking at information operations, disinformation. But AI very much as an enabler in and beyond the cyber domain. Now, I'm at my 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop, but really happy to take any questions about all these interlinkages in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And I think it's very important to reflect also on the very hybridity, right, and the blurring lines between offense and defense, which are brought by AI. And also thanks for reflecting a bit on the kind of temporality of all of this, right, and the fact that we cannot really keep up with the technological development in light of the times of publication. So that's very good. All right. Now it's time for our last speaker. And before giving the floor to Arindrajit, I would like to invite other participants in the audience to start preparing questions. You can either write them in the chat and I will read them for our speakers, or you can actually just intervene and by turning on your camera and microphone. So Arindrajit.
Many thanks, Fabio, and congratulations on the book. I'll be speaking about the chapter, Will India Negotiate the Politics of Multilateral Engagement for Fostering Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace, which I co-authored with Karthik Nachiappan, who couldn't join because I think he's based in Singapore, so it's a bit late. So I think the starting point when we talk about emerging actors is that we try to, and I've often been guilty of this myself, is that we often try to impose constructs, largely Western constructs, in terms of what we are familiar with, and try to understand the behavior of both states and other actors in the regime through how, say, states have shaped global governance regimes in the past. And that actually precludes us from going into an assessment of the hybrid political economy factors that actually shape how various emerging actors actually function. And one tendency that has been done with regard to India quite often over decades is been the imposition of labels. So Indian approaches to multilateralism have often been kind of described as defensive, as prickly, as obstructionist, and as reticent. And what we try to argue is that these labels basically conceal as much as they reveal. So if you go with any of these labels and try to understand and predict how India would behave at any regime only using this label, or even a combination of these labels, that will not be enough. And what is actually required is a rigorous empirical assessment of what India did with regard to each regime. And this is precisely what Karthik did in his book, Does India Negotiate?, where he looked at four regimes that India was a part of in the 1990s. He looked at the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, he looked at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, at the WTO, and at the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty negotiations. And what he found, and that's the framework we used to develop this chapter, was that basically India's approach is determined by a hybrid combination of three factors. First is, what are the nature and extent of economic and security interests in the outcome of a regime? Second, what is the extent of institutional, that is government institutional capacity and cohesion? And third, what are the various degree of multi-stakeholder influences by groups from India? So the private sector, civil society, academia, and so on. And we applied that construct to India's participation at the GGE and OEWG up till 2021. And what we found is that basically India's negotiation on one of the controversial parts of the OEWG, such as the applicability of international law, has been, say, non-committal, because unlike several other countries, India has not put out a one-stop statement on how international law applies. It voted for both the resolutions that set up the GGE, the US-sponsored resolution, as well as the Russia-sponsored resolution that set up the OEWG. And many of the contributions, at least till 2021, were largely limited to language edits and reaffirmations of things that were already said. So while India was participating and ensuring that its voice was heard, it wasn't actually taking a very clear stance or even setting a new agenda. And that's changed a bit with the ongoing OEWG, where India has taken some firm stances on specific issues such as supply chains or capacity building, and even made a new proposal. But till 2021, this was very much the case. So to conclude, what we try to argue is that this sort of non-committal stance at the first committee can actually be made sense of if you apply this three-pronged framework. So in terms of interests, while cybersecurity is very much a crucial interest for India, simply because it's unlikely that this regime in the short run will result in binding rules, this regime itself has not been political or a strategic priority yet. And that continues to be the case. And we can contrast that with India's participation at other technology regimes such as the WTO, where is a possibility of legally binding outcomes that constrains domestic policy making space. Whereas, as Giovanni was saying, it's unlikely that, especially at the first committee, there will be something very clear that comes out. The second factor is institutions. While there are a number of institutions in India that work on cybersecurity policy under the Ministry of Defense, there is a Defense Cyber Agency that is a tripartite service of the armed forces. The Ministry of External Affairs, of course, has the Cyber Diplomacy Division, but also a new and strategic technology, an emerging strategic technologies division that deals with newer technologies. There is the Ministry of Home Affairs. There is, of course, METI, which is the Electronics and Information Technology Ministry. And all of these do deal with cybersecurity. But because this regime itself, the UN First Committee, has not been a political priority, there has not been as much cohesion as there has been, say, at other regimes India has participated in or even led, like the G20, where there was much more cohesion. And finally, on external stakeholder participation, again, while cybersecurity is a priority, because there is a lack of legally binding outcomes that this regime will see, private sector has simply not lobbied as hard or expressed its stake. So when India participates at trade forums, for example, the private sector is very clear on on the outcomes it desires. Here it's been largely, again, non-committal. And with civil society as well, because there are limited political implications, the focus has been much more on domestic policy issues such as data protection, privacy, data localization, and so on. So therefore, what we have is a definite result of a hybrid and complex political economy that has resulted in shaping how India negotiates. This is not a judgment on whether it's good or bad. We can discuss that later. But this is just to say that imposing a label based on familiar constructs doesn't actually pay, and it helps to actually do the empirical work. And the rest of the section on emerging actors also does something similar. So the chapter by Irene, Josh, and Josh Gold and Justin Lau does the same, comparing India, Indonesia, and South Africa. There's a fantastic chapter on Europe and another great chapter on civil society. So I think that this idea that I'm saying with the Indian case study applies to the other chapters as well. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Arindrajit. And actually mentioning the chapter on Europe and European digital sovereignty, I think I see that Cedric Amon, one of our contributors, is here participating. So hi, Cedric, nice to see you here. All right, very interesting. I think just a final remark, and then we can open the Q&A. I think it's important then to, as we argue also in the introduction chapter of the volume, to think about the complexity that comes with the hybridity and conflict in cyberspace, and the idea that we should perhaps move beyond thinking of those as issues to resolve, but rather to embrace this kind of hybridity and conflict as we say in the volume, features and not bugs of cyberspace and its global politics.